Hello and welcome to If You Love This Planet. If you've ever wondered how the body is affected by cell phone radiation, you will not want to miss today's show. My guest is Dr. Gautam Vinny Khurana, a senior staff specialist neurosurgeon at the Canberra Hospital, which is the capital city of Australia, an associate professor of neurosurgery at the Australian National University Medical School. Dr. Khurana has conducted some very interesting research into electromagnetic radiation from cell phones. Over 3 billion people use cell phones worldwide, and this is an area that a lot of people are concerned about. After graduating with medical and research degrees in Australia in 1995, Dr. Khurana moved to the USA for advanced training at the world-renowned Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. He returned to Australia after 10 years of specialist training. Dr. Khurana has received 17 national and international awards and has authored 2 books, Brain Surgery and The Brain Aneurysm. He's also written over 35 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters, and his research endeavours have been featured in media across the globe. Dr. Gautam Khurana, welcome to If You Love This Planet.
Well, thank you very much. I'm honoured and delighted to be part of this interview, so thank you.
Oh, good, thanks. Well, I have a lot of questions myself, let alone I'm sure the audience does. But how did you become interested in this area of cell phone, mobile phones, electromagnetic radiation as a neurosurgeon?
I've got to say, to be honest, I really was quite unaware and had no specific interest in this till 2006, a time when a close friend of mine, a renowned professor of surgery here, Professor Chris O'Brien, developed a brain tumor. He was first a mentor of mine, and then we became close friends over many years. And he developed a malignant brain tumor, and in my opinion, was a heavy cell phone user, and the tumor was located immediately underneath the ear at which he held his cell phone. So that kind of got me thinking about this, and in that same year, I heard of a cancer cluster that occurred on the top floors of a Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology building, and on the roof of that building was a telecommunications tower, and there was several people who worked in that building. On the top 2 floors had developed brain tumors, and that got me thinking about this. So I started a long and I think a very rewarding journey academically into reading about electromagnetic radiation, about cell phones, about communication systems based on mobile telephony, and came up with a report that received worldwide attention in early 2008.
Yes. Well, can you summarize the results of your report?
Well, the initial report was and that occurred prior to the peer-reviewed publication that followed. But the initial report that was released by me was, in fact, just a very comprehensive review of many papers, of journal articles, of resources such as the Bioinitiative report and so forth, which touched upon these areas. And it was kind of looking at it fairly openly, and then putting all of the facts together as best as I could understand them. And what I came to the conclusion that I came to in this report was that that there are a lot of studies out there that really do suggest that prolonged usage of cell phones or exposure at close proximity to cell phone masts, that is these transmission towers for mobile telephony, can have adverse health effects. And so my conclusion was that, in fact, there was a lot of evidence out there, and that it was quite surprising that governments and industry and societies themselves had hadn't quite comprehended or taken this as seriously as one should, because of the number of people who are using this, including young children. So when that report came out, it was obviously not peer-reviewed, and subsequent to that, a very arduous task of peer review was undertaken, and it was then published in the journal Surgical Neurology, which is one of the premier neurosurgical journals.
And what sort of reception did it receive, Dr. Khurana?
Well, when the online report came out, the report was initially kind of briefly reviewed in the local media in Canberra, and then caught the attention of the UK media, the Independent, and from there it became a focus of global attention. It was aired in the United States and throughout the world, and then eventually with interviews that were given on Larry King Live, as well as 60 Minutes and other programs. So it was quite broadly received. Overall, the feedback that I got was tremendously supportive. There were certainly elements of sharp criticism from industry and from certain individuals and some scientists who are associated with industry. But overall, I had engineers, people who had worked in the cell phone industry, many of the general public, and some of my colleagues as well write to me and actually commend me on actually bringing some attention to this with some degree of credibility. I tried to point out that there was already this. Mine was simply a review. It wasn't original research.
Yeah.
Just a review of what I regard to be a lot of credible information out there by a number of people internationally. So I think I think overall I felt it was very well received. And one of the criticisms certainly that I took heed of was that, look, if you're going to say something like this, you really need to have it peer reviewed, and you need to have this published. And so I went about and did that with co-authors, some of whom have done the original research that brought attention to this area, particularly Professor Leonard Hardell and Professor Michael Kundi in Europe.
And a lot of work's been done in Sweden, has it
Yes,
not, on cell phones?
Sweden was the country which really started off the cell phone revolution, and a lot of the data that had come out of Sweden from Professor Hardell's group really was the seminal data that brought attention to the fact that there's a cancer risk associated with prolonged cell phone usage.
Now, did Dr. O'Brien, that wonderful head and neck cancer surgeon who inspired so many people in Sydney, Australia, did he think that his astrocytoma or brain tumour was caused by his cell phone?
He had a fairly equivocal point of view on that. When he was diagnosed, the first thing his wife, Gail, told him was that she thought it was his mobile phone. His neurosurgeon, Dr. Charles Teo, also said the same thing. And when I heard about his diagnosis, I also said the same thing. The three of us said it independently. Chris didn't feel that it was necessarily a cause. He mentions it in his autobiography, or where Never Say Die, which is a wonderful book. He mentions the fact that the three of us told him that that's what our concern was.
Well, tell us how much did he use his cell phone?
Well,
how many times a day?
Well, I have to tell you, whenever I visited him, he was whenever I returned yearly from the United States, I would make it a point as often as I could to visit him. And on those visits, what I witnessed was that he used it quite heavily. What he really did was use it in the car to his ear. In those years, used it to his ear while traveling at a time when you're in a vehicle, a moving target, and a cell phone mast is trying to track you. your phone puts out the most energy in order.
Oh, really? Does it?
It puts out the most energy in order to keep that signal faithful, because you're no longer standing still. It's tracking you as your car is moving rapidly. And he used to use it quite a bit in the car. He told me that, and that's when it's at peak output. And or for example, in days gone by where you were in a building, in order to keep the signal up, because of the interference from the structure of the building, the phone's output is automatically adjusted to rev up.
Fancy.
So
Now,
you see, that's how he used it. So I think in that regard, he was
a heavy, yeah. Now, what about, I have a cell phone, mobile phone, and I've got a plug-in, a little microphone that plugs into the phone so I can drive and just have this thing in my ear. Now, I've heard that my head then becomes the antenna, and it doesn't stop the radiation getting to my brain. Is that wrong or right?
Well, okay. So that was my understanding initially as well, that the head was in fact converted to an antenna.
Yeah.
So the connection, the physical wire connection, and the ability of the electromagnetic field, the radiation to travel along that wire.
Mm.
Subsequently, and particularly when I appeared on a panel with on Larry King, there was a very respected group of people from both sides, both camps on either side of that fence.
Mm.
And the consensus was that the use of a wired earpiece was a lot safer, than holding up the cell phone
to your head.
Yeah, the wireless earpiece was still and I believe still debated in terms of its safety, but the wired earpiece is a lot safer. That was the consensus.
Well, what's the wireless earpiece? The thing that people walk around in airports with that little thing attached to their ear, Bluetooth.
Yeah, Bluetooth, the thing that they plug in, and and obviously it's convenient, and initially when
it goes straight into their brain.
Well, there was an engineer who wrote to me saying that when he was one of the developers of the wireless Bluetooth signal or the technology, he said that when they developed it so that pulse of radiation that is constant, even when it's not in direct use, communicating, because it needs to be tracked by the cell phone that's at the hip usually. That pulse of radiation was which is regular, was designed for maximal penetration into a gel-like substance.
Oh God! Which is the brain. Why did they do that?
Well, obviously to maintain a very clear signal, to maintain the sound, the kind of a faithful audio. That's I imagine why they wanted to keep that as in order to get that signal into the hearing nerve, and then obviously register to the brain thereafter.
Now, Dr. Crana, there are some antennae, wired microphones you could plug into your phone that I think are specially designed to block out the infrared, not infrared, electromagnetic radiation. Is that true?
Well, the U.S. military is supplied by a company called Aegis that with earphones that have or earpieces that have an intervening area of an air-containing tube, so that the wire itself stops before it reaches the head, and the rest of that signal, the sound, the oscillatory sound, is conducted through that air tube. And they're referred to as air tube headsets or tube headsets. And so yes, there are. And that is obviously, according to Aegis's website, supplied to the U.S. military. So I imagine that there must be a reason for producing such a thing for the military.
Well, I've tried to buy such a tool, and it's almost impossible to get one.
Well, that's correct. It's not as I might be wrong about this, but I don't think it's even marketed in Australia, and it's really not something that's in mainstream.
No. Now, I want you then, Dr. Crana, to describe to the audience how we think, scientists and medical scientists and biologists think that electromagnetic radiation can induce cancer?
Okay, so let's first begin by saying that there's no proof that cell phone-related electromagnetic radiation can cause cancer. But you must look at it broadly. Electromagnetic radiation is a spectrum. At the very low ends of that spectrum, that is the low intensity, the kind of what's referred to as a longer wavelength.
Radio waves.
The radio waves, the power lines are even weaker than the radio waves. As you move up that spectrum to the more high energy side, you get to the microwave region where cell phones, their masts, and microwave ovens sit side by side.
Right.
Then as you go beyond that, you move up towards ultraviolet light such as solariums, and then beyond that into kind of the X-ray end of the spectrum.
Ionizing radiation.
Ionizing radiation. So we have in cell phones and microwaves, but specifically cell phones, are thought to be emitters of non-ionizing radiation.
Yep.
So they're thought by that definition not to emit radiation that is strong enough to break molecular bonds and cause DNA damage. Okay?
Mutations.
Yep. Whereas at the higher end, the ionizing radiation, such as X-rays, we all know.
And ultraviolet radiation.
And ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, nuclear bombs, all of those things cause cancer.
Yep.
We know that. That's well accepted by governments and the World Health Organization and so forth. But the non-ionizing cell phone radiation is thought not to cause it. Now, you ask, well, then how does this conjecture arise where we're saying that there is evidence for an association? Well, in the journal Science, I published a letter, and you probably would recognize Science is one of the leading journals, scientific journals of the world. Published a letter where I clarified some misinformation about this issue. There are numerous laboratories, independent laboratories throughout the world that have published peer-reviewed articles suggesting that even though we're talking about non-ionizing radiation, DNA damage is in fact observed with radiation such as cell phone type radiation. And microwaves. And the mechanism of that is certainly not known, but there are theories about that.
Do they see, can you see DNA breakage?
Yes, you can. Damaged DNA breakage. And Science, the journal Science, actually acknowledged that in their response to my letter, that they are now aware of other papers that have in fact cited that.
Oh.
And in fact, about less than a month ago, one of the leading a Centre of Research Excellence in Australia, based in Newcastle, published an article where they have exposed human sperm to cell phone radiation and have in fact observed DNA damage. That has been published. They proposed a mechanism as well in that paper. So I think the point is that even though we call this non-ionizing, we all say, well, because it's non-ionizing, can't cause it. I think we need to be thinking about the possibility that it is either it promotes cancers, so it doesn't have to directly break DNA, although there's evidence for that, but it may contribute to cancer through other mechanisms apart from DNA breakage.
But they have shown, is the DNA breakage related to microwave radiation and electromagnetic radiation dose-related, Dr. Carano?
Is it dose-related? I don't know for sure if there's a dose response, but we do know that if you think about electromagnetic radiation in terms of dose and intensity, as you go up the scale from the low frequencies to the very high frequencies along that electromagnetic radiation spectrum, that is, as the dose increases, you start observing cancers. So microwaves seem to be right at the borderline of on the one side, so you got the dangerous UV, X-ray, atomic, and on the other side you've got what's radio waves.
Okay, so it seems fairly clear. I mean, obviously there needs to be much work done, but it seems fairly clear what we call etiology or cause of a disease could well be related to electromagnetic radiation and cancer. Now, you are a neurosurgeon, Dr. Crana. Have you observed people who've developed brain tumours related to their on the same side that they use their cell phones or mobile phones?
I mean, I have, and I can't prove anything based on observation. But I can say that what concerns me is that that those who are concerned about this issue do see a number of younger patients than would be expected with malignant tumors, and a number of them have exposures such as prolonged cell phone use on that side. Not all, but the interesting thing is, one has to really think about where are these cancers originating from, and does it have to be on the same side? These malignant tumors appear to be associated with the very center part of the brain, where the human brain's stem cells are present, in what's known as the periventricular zone, which is kind of in the center of the brain.
Oh, is that where they seem to originate?
Well, when we see brain cancers, the majority of them, radiologically at least, appear to taper down into that periventricular zone at the center of the brain. So does if it's in the center, does it have to necessarily lateralize to one side in relationship to the exposure or the instigating insult? But the point is that we don't know at the moment what primary brain tumor incidence is in Australia. We do have some information from the United States that there is an increasing incidence from the Central Brain Tumor Registry of the United States. It is not completely clear at this time what's causing that increase in incidence. We have depicted that in our publication, the graph that shows it is increasing. The latest report from the United States Central Brain Tumor Registry only goes as far as 2005. We have seen a 36% increase in primary brain tumor incidence between 1995 and that 2004-2005 period. And certainly there are many reasons for why it might be increasing, but it's something that we need to keep a track of.
And when did cell phone use become common in the Western world?
In Europe, cell phone use started to proliferate in the mid-90s. In the mid-90s. So in the United States, obviously, and in Australia, there was a delay because it really started in Western and Northern Europe initially, and then the US and Australia picked up on it later. But the proliferation started in the mid-90s.
Well, okay. Now let's talk. I've got lots more questions. One is just basic. Do cell phones emit radiation when they're not in use? And what about when they're roaming?
Right. So cell phones, unless they are switched off, not in sleep mode, but actually switched off, or their battery removed. So under those circumstances, where they're switched off or the battery is removed, they are not emitting any form of electromagnetic radiation.
But when they're on?
When you're talking, obviously they are. When you're not speaking, and like my phone sitting next to me here, it is sending a signal at regular intervals to a mast that could be kilometers away or hundreds of meters away, to let that mast know where this phone is in space. And so it has to. That's why the signal is maintained, because it can be tracked.
Yeah.
And so yes, they are emitting unless they are physically switched off or have their batteries removed. In roaming mode, I'm not sure what you mean by roaming mode. Do you mean that when you're walking around with them? Yes.
They're still switched on.
It's the same deal. When you're walking and they're not switched off, they're in your waist pocket or in your breast pocket, wherever they may be. they are continuously, or I would say repetitively, sending a signal to the mast that constitutes the cellular network in order for that mast to know where that phone is.
And how close to the body, or how far away from the body, should a cell phone or mobile phone be so that the body receives no electromagnetic radiation?
Well, it's based on what's referred to as the inverse square law. Essentially, that means is as you move the emitter away from the body, there is a exponential decrease in the radiation received by the body. A safe distance would be around 20 centimeters.
Yeah.
Now, interesting that, and this is published in the manuals and online by the company, but I use an Apple iPhone, the latest one, for my work. I use it on speakerphone mode, so I don't hold it to my ear. But if you actually read the manual that comes with the phone, or look it up online, and it's obviously published, public information, the company, Apple, actually recommends that the phone be held at least 5/8 of an inch away from the body. It should not be held less than 5/8 of an inch next to the ear. And they say in their manual that if you're holding it around the waist or whatever, it should be at least 5/8 of an inch away from the body. No physical contact. Now that's an interesting thing to state in a manual. So
Yeah.
they also state clearly that if you're concerned about it, the further you hold this away, the safer it becomes. So I think that's a rather interesting comment to make.
Yeah, especially from the company making them. Now, so if people walk around with them in their breast pocket, A, the breast is being irradiated, be it male or female breast. If they walk around with it in their pants pocket, the testicles could be being irradiated.
I agree with you. They are. It's not a matter of could.
They are.
They are. I mean, we know these things produce radiation. We know that it's defined as non-ionizing. We know it's low intensity, low energy, but it still has what is known as a plume. Just like when a bomb goes off, there's that mushroom cloud. Well, this thing has its own plume. There's a field around it, and so anything within that field will be technically irradiated, whether it be high energy or low energy is another matter.
Okay, now let's talk about children and cell phones, because the kids walk around with them glued to their ear, or they're texting and they're constantly on using their cell phones. Certainly in Australia, but I know in the United States too, and probably in Europe. And little children are getting cell phones, mobile phones now. So would you like to address that subject, Dr. Carano?
Well, I'm obviously very concerned. As I mentioned on 60 Minutes, the exposure of children is my single greatest concern. The reason being is that, firstly, a child who's handed a cell phone doesn't know anything about the energy, or doesn't think about exposures, and it's just a glossy-looking, fantastic toy that they can show their friends, etc. So a child, there's a certain amount of innocence there that is different to an adult who's handed a phone or a cigarette, for example. So the other thing that concerns me, of course, is that the child's anatomy and physiology is different to an adult. A young child has a thin scalp, has a thinner skull. That means that if something is going to penetrate into its brain, it will do so, particularly when we're dealing with a radiation type thing, it will do so much more effectively in a child's head compared to an adult. The second issue is that the volume of a child's head and brain, a young child's head and brain, is significantly less than that of an adult. So if you hold the same emitter up to an adult's brain and a child's brain, you know that the emitter, the plume of that emission, will penetrate more or further across a child's head and brain, owing to its lower volume. Another issue is that a child's brain contains relatively more water, which we know is obviously a conductor of current.
Yep.
And then the other thing is a child's brain is much more plastic. It is in a mode of flourishing where connections are rapidly forming. Some are, there's connections, disconnections, etc., happening, in a very kind of energized and active state compared to, an adult or an older person.
And cells rapidly dividing in mitosis.
Absolutely. So there is, rapid division is possibly, an event where things can be also equally disturbed in that setting. And there's been modeling. I've read review articles that have modeled mathematically the exposure of a child's skull and brain relative to that of an adult. And those articles have stated that compared to an adult, penetration from electromagnetic radiation of cell phones is 20 to 120% higher
Oh my
in
God.
a child's head compared to that of an adult. And this is peer-reviewed, published data. So if like has recently happened in the United Kingdom, where cell phones have obviously been for children has been declared safe.
Has it? Have they?
Yes, it has. In
By
fact,
whom?
the health authorities
Oh my God.
in Ireland, followed more recently by England, have declared that there is no concern for children. And this has been information that has been passed on to me by associates, colleagues of mine in the United Kingdom. And I just can't understand how you could make that statement and what data that must be based on. And I'd be very happy to look at that data because what I've read would suggest that precautionary principle should still be in place. So,
as children, they're 10 to 20 times more sensitive to ionizing radiation than adults, and actually fetuses are thousands of times more sensitive to ionizing radiation because their cells are so actively dividing. Are your colleagues seeing more brain tumors in younger people now?
I have to say that some of my colleagues who are looking out for that are saying so. Many are not commenting on whether they are or not. Now, I know that there are colleagues of mine who say, well, last I operated on 10 brain tumors. And to me, that immediately raises the question, why are you seeing so many tumors?
Yeah, of course.
But of course, not everyone asks that question. It's just the fact that they're seeing and doing and obviously contributing positively to society by helping those very unfortunate people. But we need to determine that in an objective way, not in an anecdotal way.
Yes.
So even if my colleagues are saying that, there could be referral bias, there could be many reasons for it. We need to be able to determine that objectively.
Yeah.
Going to at the grassroots level, the places that these brain tumor specimens are sent to talk with our registries about what they're actually seeing and how they're collating their data. And I think it's only at that point we can make a more objective statement. And regardless of what the trend is, we need to know that information as we move into the future.
Okay, so is the trend, Dr. Khurana, more in malignant gliomas, astrocytomas, and or meningiomas, which are benign brain tumors? What is the trend showing in terms of specific brain tumors?
The Brain Tumor Registry of the United States, the Central Brain Tumor Registry, they have reported an increase in certain benign tumors and a certain group of astrocytomas. So there is
both.
There's both. The interesting thing about acoustic neuromas, the hearing nerve, is that data is somehow being clouded because those tumors are now mostly being treated non-operatively.
Oh, are they?
By radiation, stereotactic radiation. Certainly the larger ones are still being sent to surgeons, but the smaller ones are being treated by radiation. And so the incidence of those particular tumors may be falsely decreasing simply because pathologists and surgeons are not seeing the actual specimens anymore. They're just, the data of whether a tumor is increasing in incidence or decreasing comes from ultimately the number of specimens.
Oh, really? It's not. There's no register where I thought there was, where we had to register cancers when they occurred, even if they get healed or cured.
Yes, but you see, certain of these tumours that are associated with prolonged cell phone use, etc., are not defined as cancers. I mean, acoustic neuroma or vestibular schwannoma, which is a tumour of the hearing nerve, which we've shown from our meta-analysis to be significantly increased in terms of incidence with long-term cell phone usage, is not actually defined as a cancer. It's defined as a benign cancer
because it doesn't spread or metastasize. But of course, if you get a tumor in the brain, be it benign or malignant, it takes up volume, and as the brain is in a fixed box, it can press the brain to such an extent, of course, that the patient can die.
They're called benign, and that means that they're potentially survivable. But absolutely, you can speak to many people who have had so-called benign tumors removed and see how those tumors or the treatments of those tumors can affect them.
Yes.
And, here's an example: acoustic neuroma is one of those which is not defined as a cancer, and another one which is a glioma. Can be defined as a precancerous tumor and therefore not necessarily reportable. So you see, there's a lot of non-uniformity about what we're actually causing cancers and non-cancers, and so I think we need to really look at that in a very, very systematic way.
My guest today is Dr. Gautam Khurana, a neurosurgeon at the Canberra Hospital in Australia and an associate professor of neurosurgery at the Australian National University Medical School. Now, are you planning, Dr. Khurana, to start doing this epidemiological work? It seems like you're the logical person, the point person.
It's already begun.
Good. What are you looking at? Only Australian data, or are you looking at United States and Europe? What are you doing?
I'm monitoring the United States data, but looking at the Australian data.
And how are you going to get the data for benign tumours like eighth nerve neuromas and meningiomas and the like that aren't classified as actual cancers? How are you going to get that?
We are trying to do that through pathology units in a multi-centre manner.
Now, let's talk about people that work on high-tension wires, electricians. I had a friend in Adelaide, a neurosurgeon, Dr. Paul Carney, and he years ago, it must be 15, 20 years ago, told me that he is seeing, and it's, I know that correlation doesn't equal causation, or incidence doesn't equal causation, but he said he was seeing brain tumours in men who climb those high tension posts and deal with high tension wires. And I know there's been a worry about people living underneath high tension electrical wires. Can you talk about that, please, Dr. Khurana?
Well, I'd have to say, Helen, that is not an area of expertise of mine. I have specifically devoted a lot of my time to cell phones and cell phone masks.
Right.
But certainly not that level of attention to power lines. Now, I would qualify that by saying that there is a report online that has been put forth by a number of scientists from several countries, and it's called the Bio-Initiative Report, and the report is available freely at bioinitiative.org, and that report does specifically look into the health effects of epidemiologically of radiation from high tension power lines, particularly with its association of leukemias.
Oh yeah.
So I would say that I don't have enough knowledge about that myself.
Yes.
To be able to kind of give you a meaningful expert response.
And then there are other areas where electromagnetic radiation is produced in everyday life, like electric blankets.
Oh, look, yes, absolutely. I mean,
and computers and all the electronic equipment we have in our houses that we sit quite close to. And I know people who've got instruments to measure electromagnetic radiation. For instance, they went into a library through the scanning mechanism and what the women sitting at the desk were exposed to, and it was really high-level electromagnetic radiation.
Well, look, Helen, I share this concern. I have done those measurements, and with the assistance of professionals who do this day after day, I have grounds for those concerns. You know, our Prime Minister told us publicly that if Australians live to the age of 85, up to 1 in 2 of them will experience cancer. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've got to say that cancer is not going away. Certain cancers, the mortality has decreased because we have some better treatments, but it really will amount to. It is increasing, and really the best solution for cancer is prevention.
Yep. Really the only solution, actually.
I agree. And so what we have here is that you're talking about electric blankets. Well, they concern me. I'm concerned that children who play for hours a day on floors that have in-slab heating with electrical wiring.
Oh, really?
Which is found in many daycares in Australia. And in homes, people who sleep all night, with electric blankets, people who sit for hours a day under right next to their laptop computers. There's a report that has just come out that has investigated the incidence of brain tumors amongst the offspring of women who sit professionally for hours a day at sewing machines, electrical sewing machines, and they have found a significantly increased number of times increased rate of brain tumor incidence in the offspring of those women, and I think that is a seminal kind of statement, not certainly any proof, but it lends substance to the concern you've expressed and that I share. Is that could these things be part and parcel of the increasing cancer rate we are seeing?
And what about laptops? Do they give a lot of electromagnetic?
They do. Those measurements have been made.
Yeah.
Publications of those measurements, and it has been advised that the last place that a laptop should be is on your lap.
Well, what about if it's on a desk, like about 2 feet away?
I think that's a lot safer. I mean, it's a distance thing, and so. I think it remains to be determined, but it's almost like a paradigm shift in the way we're thinking. Now, you remember smoking. You remember...
Yes, I certainly do.
Asbestos. You remember X-rays when they came out, ultraviolet tanning booths. Yep. Thalidomide. All these things were well accepted, thought to be safe, approved by industries and governments.
Of course.
And, I remember the pictures of doctors in their white gowns with cigarettes promoting them, and these were on advertisements, and just look at how this paradigm shift has taken place in the last few decades. Well, we may be entering such a phase with electromagnetic radiation, and we can't take away things like natural sunlight and so forth, and no one's saying throw your cell phones away or your electronics, but perhaps think of them as a potential health risk that is A, worthy of exploration, and B, if there is an issue, worthy of addressing from a preventative health perspective.
And of course, television sets.
I think close up.
They also emit gamma radiation because they have thorium in them.
They do, and I think
that's
again...
That's ionizing radiation.
It's ionizing, and I think the issue is particularly close up. People have made those measurements and found them to be high when one is close to such sets. But I think it's something that will become more topical as it won't just disappear.
Get more data. So everyone should know that radiation, be it ionizing or electromagnetic radiation, ultraviolet radiation, the dose you get decreases with the square of the distance. So if you put your laptop 2 feet away, you're going to be relatively safe, right, Dr. Carano?
I believe so, absolutely, based on that inverse square law.
Yeah. Based
on the fact that a laptop itself doesn't generate large amounts of energy, so 2 feet seems like a very safe distance. But I think within 10 to 20 centimeters, it would be rather safe.
So you know how laptops get hot Is that because of the electromagnetic radiation, like cell phones sometimes get hot?
I think there's a certain amount of heat that is generated by the actual
Why?
circuitry within it. Things get heated up
Yeah.
by the circuitry, so it's not there's a thermal component that's just generated. But I couldn't say with any great expertise the exact sources of the heating. So
No.
I would prefer that question.
Yes. So what really worries me is there are 3 billion people using cell phones worldwide.
Well, 4 billion now. It was 3 billion
really?
about a year ago. Yes.
Oh my God! And there's a huge amount of money to be made with people selling these cell phones, and then the cell phones get a bit old-fashioned and people buy more. It's a huge, rapidly growing industry. Obviously, people who work for the industry would say that, they would want to negate what you're talking about, Dr. Khurana, and those of us in the medical profession who are very concerned. So we're up against, it's kind of like the nuclear power industry. We're up against highly financed people who have a conflict of interest.
Yes, we are.
So what are you going to do about it?
Well, I think it requires, as best as one can, a kind of a balanced approach. Being aggressively militant about this cell phone issue is not a long-term solution.
Yes.
So the purpose of my report was to make people aware. I had to take a fairly strong view because I was flabbergasted when I read so much work that suggested that there is a basis, a scientific, meritorious basis for concern.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do? Well, I think part of these things these things are already happening.
Yeah.
Today, for example, in the United States, that's September 15 here and September 14 in the U.S. Senator Arlen Specter, a U.S. senator, is chairing a U.S. Senate inquiry into the health effects of cell phones, which is, I think, a landmark move. A few months ago, the European Parliament debated the health effects of electromagnetic radiation, and in a landslide vote, voted towards getting this on the table in terms of really now looking at these health risks with all the new long-term epidemiologic data in mind. So I think...
And all the electrical appliances we are surrounded with, both in the office, at our work, and at home.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are totally immersed, and not only that, we are addicted as a species to cell phones. And so first, I think the answer here is that we need objective data. You cannot hide after a while. If it's true, you can't hide the fact, if it is a fact, and I don't know that for sure. If there is a greatly increasing incidence of brain tumors or other cancers, and we have postulated this as being a possible cause, after a while you won't be able to hide that fact, no matter how much money you have. And so I think it needs some epidemiological studies to be soundly done on a number of fronts. It needs governments to recognize that yes, money is important, but human health is more important, and we just need to make sure we can preserve that human health. And as I said, there is no proof of this, but I think there's enough evidence to be concerned and to want to know a definitive answer.
That's right. Now, so you apparently use an Apple iPhone. Do your families use a cell phone? Are you now saying to people, throw away your cell phones, or what can people do to protect themselves? This is terribly important.
It is. Firstly, I'm absolutely not saying throw away your cell phones. They are life-saving tools.
Sometimes.
Sometimes. We know that cell phones are life-endangering tools when they're used in cars. We know that. I'm not saying throw away your cell phones. I'm saying that that cell phone usage should be modified to make it safer, and especially when there is concern based on the data that we have, and with the data that has been published. So the way to make it safer is that instead of holding it to your ear, keep it on a speakerphone mode. If it's a privacy issue where, on the speakerphone and the iPhone, the reason I use it is because it has such a clear speakerphone. I keep it at least 20 centimeters away from my head when I'm using it on speakerphone mode. If a privacy issue arises, then a wired earpiece can be used, or just defer the conversation if possible to a landline. So just use a landline. I'm also saying that a hands-free car kit is safer, obviously, than holding it to your ear, because the roof of the car is actually acting as the antenna. But overall, I think the preference should be to just use a landline like we used to.
Well, now, what about landlines that have phones that are not wired, that you walk around with the mobile phone?
So those are cordless headsets or cordless handsets. The handset, which is cordless, that we use, that is so widely available at home for home usage, they have an antenna and they emit electromagnetic radiation at a lower intensity than that of the cell phone, but we tend to use them for much longer. And Professor Hardell's studies from Sweden have shown that that prolonged usage of those handsets, those cordless handsets, is also significantly associated with increased tumor rates. So they are a problem. So how do we do it? You asked about my family's use.
Yes.
I told you how I use it. My wife uses hers the same way. Our children do not use cell phones.
Yep.
And when they use the cordless phone, it's used in limited amounts, i.e. restricting the time of usage, but always on a speakerphone mode. And our cordlesses have speakerphones. We don't keep the base station of the cordless unit anywhere near our heads.
Right. Because that emits radiation as well.
Constantly.
Oh, my God.
Well, I mean...
It's kind of like, when I graduated in medicine or when I started in 1956, we already knew, really, that smoking caused cancer, but it took decades for us to infiltrate that into the public consciousness.
Well, why was that? And I think many people...
Because of the tobacco companies putting out the propaganda. And what they mostly did was inject doubt into the debate. That's what they did. And now that's what the nuclear power industry is doing. And the climate change skeptics, they're injecting doubt, and they're financed by Exxon and all the rest. I mean...
Yes, the formula is very straightforward. If you... as you probably hear, that the spin doctors in all of these different areas say that when they put the data together, there is what they call the weight of evidence. And how do you create a weight of evidence? What you do is you basically flood the market with the literature, that is, with papers and letters, etc., that are essentially have some roots in industry. And you say, well, look, here's 10 papers, and 8 of them, say that there's no problem, and these 2 say there is a problem. Therefore, the weight of evidence says there's no problem. It's when you start looking into that, where those papers come from, you realize.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I think, and we're colleagues, I'm a pediatrician, you're a neurosurgeon, I think from a medical point of view that governments should ban these companies from putting out their propaganda either on smoking, asbestos, cell phones, and leave or nuclear power, and leave the debate and the research to us, the medical profession, who are ultimately responsible for people's health, right?
I mean, I think anyone who generates an opinion, be it a doctor, a scientist, whoever, must declare with full transparency any conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Then somebody who is reading this can openly make up their own mind. So, for example, if I debate somebody and I have no conflict of interest in this, it's a pure health concern, just as you share. But if we debate someone who is being funded directly or indirectly by the party that is the concern of the debate, that should be openly declared.
Okay, I'm going to do that with Ziggy Switkowski next time I debate him, who comes from the nuclear industry. That you're a bit embarrassed to do that, but
no, I think the publications, journals, and scientific conferences now require conflicts of interest to be openly declared, and I think that is the first step, and then let the public decide. But I think those conflicts of interest must be declared up front.
Well, you've given me grist for my mill. We've run out of time. This has been an absolutely fascinating discussion, Dr. Khurana, and I thank you very much for providing the information for our, I'm sure, very curious audience.
My pleasure, Helen. If people would like to have more information, I do maintain a web page, and am I able to quote that web page?
Yes, please.
It's www.brain, BRAIN, dash, that's just a regular dash, surgery, SURGERY.US. And if you go to that page, there's a banner that appears, and the link goes to the mobile phone page, which has a lot of this information that has brought the concern to me.
Excellent, and more power for you. And I think this is the course of your professional career, Dr. Khurana.
I think you're right.
Yeah, like I read On the Beach when I was about 19, and that became my professional career, trying to prevent nuclear war and close down nuclear power plants. It's funny how you get onto these tracks, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Yeah.
But thank you. It's been a privilege to be able to share this time with you and your audience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. Cheers.